The first time I noticed her, the library was nearly empty. Evening had settled in, wrapping the old building in a quiet stillness, broken only by the soft hum of fluorescent lights and the faint shuffle of pages turning. I had come there, as I often did, to escape the noise of my world, a place where I could bury myself in books, lose track of time, and breathe in the scent of old paper and polished wood. That night, I wasn't alone. She moved between the shelves with a kind of quiet grace, the kind you don't expect in such an ordinary setting. She wasn't rushing, wasn't restless. She belonged there, as much a part of the place as the towering shelves and the worn carpet underfoot. Her hair, dark with a few strands of silver that only seemed to make her look more striking, caught the soft glow of the lamps. There was a steadiness in the way she carried herself, like she'd lived enough life to be unshaken by trivial things. At first, I only glanced at her, the way one notices a portrait on the wall and quickly looks away. But the second time my eyes found her, I didn't look away as quickly. There was something magnetic about the quiet authority in her movements, something that told me she saw more than she let on. I sat at my usual corner table, a heavy novel open in front of me, though I barely read a line. The subtle rhythm of her footsteps filled the silence, and then, without warning, she was standing at the end of my row. She held a book in her hand, its faded spine balanced easily between her fingers, and her eyes flicked toward me. "You've been here a lot lately," she said softly. Her voice wasn't stern like I'd expected. It carried warmth, low and smooth, the kind of tone that lingers even after the words are gone. I smiled awkwardly, caught off guard. Guess I like the quiet. Her lips curved, just slightly, into something that wasn't quite a smile, but carried the suggestion of one. She stepped closer, sliding the book across the table toward me. "This one's better than the one you're pretending to read." Her fingertips brushed mine as I reached for it. It was the smallest touch, accidental perhaps, but the cool softness of her skin sent an unexpected ripple through me. My breath caught, and for a moment, neither of us moved. She withdrew her hand with practiced calm, though I thought I saw the faintest flicker in her eyes, a spark quickly hidden. And just like that, she was gone again, weaving back between the shelves as though she'd only been a passing thought. But the touch lingered, the sound of her voice lingered, and the faint trace of her perfume seemed to follow me through the rest of the night. I had come to the library to lose myself in books. That evening, I found myself lost in something else entirely. The next evening, I went back. I told myself it was for the peace and quiet, for the weight of the books and the comfort of their silence. But deep down, I knew I was looking for her. The library was quieter than usual, only a few scattered readers tucked away in corners. And there she was, the librarian, shelving books with an ease that seemed almost rehearsed. She moved like someone who knew where everything belonged, not just in the library, but in life. Confident, collected, untouchable. I settled into my usual spot, pretending to read, though my attention wandered with every sound of her heels tapping softly against the floor. After a while, her shadow stretched across my desk. I looked up, and she was standing there, one eyebrow slightly raised, lips curved in the suggestion of a smile. "You always choose this corner," she said, her tone light, teasing. I gave a half shrug, trying to sound casual even as my chest tightened at her attention. "It feels safe, like no one can see me here." Her eyes flickered with something amused, maybe even curious. "Safe, HM? You do realize this isn't a hiding place, right? It's a library." I laughed under my breath, shaking my head. Could have fooled me. For a moment, silence hung between us, but it wasn't heavy. It was warm, stretched thin with something unspoken. She leaned down, not much, just enough that I could smell the faint trace of her perfume, a clean, subtle scent like fresh pages mixed with something floral. Her gaze slid to the book in my hands. "You know," she murmured, "if you keep reading the same paragraph over and over, you'll wear the ink off." Heat rushed to my face. She had caught me. I stammered. I was just distracted. That was when she leaned in, close enough that her voice felt like a secret meant only for me. "Careful with that bookmark," she teased. "Some stories aren't meant to be rushed." Her hand rested, lightly, on the back of my chair as she said it. Not firm, not demanding, just there. The weight of her touch was subtle, yet it set every nerve in me alight. I felt the warmth of her palm through the wood, imagined what it might feel like if it were on my shoulder instead. She didn't linger long. She straightened, smoothing the front of her blouse with a practiced motion, the playful glint in her eyes already fading back into composure. "Enjoy your book," she said simply, before moving on, her heels clicking softly against the floor as she disappeared behind another row of shelves. I sat there for a long time afterward, staring at the same page without reading a word. Her voice replayed in my head. Her closeness lingered like a shadow I couldn't shake. That night, I realized something important. She wasn't just a figure behind a desk or a keeper of books. She was someone who noticed me, someone who looked just deep enough to see I wasn't here for the novels alone. And though she had walked away, I knew tomorrow I'd come back again. It was a rainy evening when everything shifted. The kind of night where the windows blurred with steady streams of water, and the library felt like a sanctuary cut off from the rest of the world. Only a few people had come in, and by the time the storm grew heavier, I realized I was one of the last left inside. She was there, of course, shelving books, her hair tied back loosely, a few strands falling to frame her face. She looked calmer than usual, almost softened by the hush of rain outside. When our eyes met across the room, she tilted her head ever so slightly, as though weighing whether to say something. Then, without a word, she motioned for me to follow. I hesitated at first, but curiosity pulled me from my chair. I trailed behind her as she led me down a narrow hallway, past a door I had never noticed before. She unlocked it with an old brass key, the kind that looked like it belonged in another century. The door creaked open, and the smell of cedar and aged paper spilled out. "This is the archive room," she explained quietly. "Not many people get to see it." I stepped inside, and it felt like stepping into a secret world. The shelves here were different, taller, older, filled with books whose covers bore the weight of decades. The air was cooler, heavier, and the faint sound of the storm outside only deepened the sense of quiet. I turned to her, half smiling. "And you're trusting me with this?" Her eyes lingered on mine, steady and unreadable. "You seem like someone who appreciates secrets." The way she said it made my chest tighten. Her voice was soft, but there was a deliberate edge to it, as though the words carried more weight than she wanted to admit. As she moved deeper into the room, her hand brushed against a shelf, fingers trailing lightly over the spines. I followed, unable to take my eyes off her. There was a reverence in the way she touched the books, but also something else, a vulnerability I hadn't seen before. At one point, she reached for a volume high above her head, and for a brief second she wavered on her heels. Without thinking, I stepped forward, steadying her by the forearm. Her skin was warm beneath my hand, her pulse faint but steady. She didn't pull away immediately. Instead, her eyes flicked down to where I held her, then up to meet mine. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The storm outside filled the silence, and it felt as though time had slowed to the rhythm of rain against glass. When she finally stepped back, her hand slipped from mine slowly, almost reluctantly. Her composure returned in an instant, though a faint color touched her cheeks. "Careful," she said, her voice softer now, almost a whisper. "These shelves hold more than books." I didn't press her for what she meant. I didn't need to. The look in her eyes told me enough that this moment, this room, was no longer about archives or old volumes. It was about something unspoken, something fragile, building carefully between us. That night, when I finally left the library, the storm had calmed. But inside me, something far less quiet had begun. A few nights later, I stayed at the library later than usual. The stormy evening in the archive room hadn't left my mind, and though I told myself I came back for the books, the truth sat heavier in my chest. I wanted to see her again. The building was quieter than usual, the last few visitors slipping out into the dusk until it was just the two of us. I wandered through the aisles, letting the silence guide me, until I saw her at a desk near the circulation counter. She wasn't shelving or tidying this time. She was sitting still, glasses set aside, her hands gently rubbing at her temples. For the first time, she didn't look like the untouchable, perfectly composed figure I'd come to admire. She looked tired, human, vulnerable. I hesitated, then stepped closer. The sound of my footsteps made her glance up, and for a second she seemed ready to slip her mask back on. But then she sighed softly and leaned back in her chair. "Long day?" I asked, my voice low, careful not to startle her. She gave a faint smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Long week," she admitted. "Sometimes I wonder if anyone sees me beyond this desk, beyond the role." Her words trailed off, as though she hadn't meant to say them out loud. I didn't know what to reply at first. I had always seen her as someone beyond reach, steady, confident, almost larger than life. And yet, here she was, confessing something quietly fragile. I moved closer, resting my hand lightly on the desk. "I see you," I said, the words slipping out more honestly than I intended. "Not just what you do here. You." Her eyes softened, searching mine with a quiet intensity that made my chest tighten. For a moment, the silence stretched, filled only by the faint hum of the lights and the whisper of rain against the windows. Then, without fully thinking, I reached forward. A single strand of hair had fallen loose, brushing against her cheek. My fingers brushed it back gently, tucking it behind her ear. Her skin was warm beneath my touch, softer than I expected, and the closeness of her face made me almost forget to breathe. She didn't move away. Her eyes fluttered shut for a heartbeat, her lips parting as though she had forgotten the weight of keeping her distance. When she opened them again, there was a flicker of something unguarded, a mix of gratitude, longing, and hesitation. "Careful," she whispered, her voice trembling just slightly. "You don't know what you're reaching for." I pulled my hand back slowly, not because I wanted to, but because I felt the weight of her words. And yet, the warmth of her skin lingered on my fingertips, the quiet ache of it impossible to ignore. She straightened in her chair, slipping her glasses back on as though nothing had happened. But when I turned to leave, I caught the smallest of glances, the kind you give when you want someone to understand what you can't say aloud. That night, I realized she wasn't just someone to admire from a distance. She was someone who carried her own unspoken heaviness, and for some reason, she had let me glimpse it. The following week, I found myself drifting back to the library almost every evening. It wasn't just the books anymore. It hadn't been for a while. It was her, the rhythm of her presence, the calm certainty she carried, the way she seemed to notice me when no one else did. That night, the library felt unusually hushed, as if even the shelves were listening. She was rearranging books along one of the taller sections, her sleeves rolled up to her elbows, her movements deliberate but not hurried. I lingered nearby, pretending to skim the spines of novels I had no intention of borrowing. I don't think she missed that. "Looking for something?" she asked, glancing over her shoulder with that knowing half-smile. I swallowed a laugh, caught in the act. "Just browsing." She murmured, sliding a book into place. "You've been doing a lot of browsing lately." Her tone was light, but her eyes flicked toward me with unmistakable sharpness, a spark of playfulness, and maybe something else hidden beneath her calm. Before I could come up with a reply, she pulled another book from the cart, held it up, then tilted her head. "Here, this one's been waiting for the right reader." I stepped closer to take it, and, as I did, she moved nearer, her arm brushing against mine as she leaned in to slide the book onto the shelf just above my head. The faintest graze of fabric against fabric, the warmth of her body beside me. It was enough to make my breath catch. For a moment, we both stood there in the narrow space between shelves, our shoulders nearly touching, the air charged with a closeness that felt too deliberate to be accidental. Then, with a mischievous glint in her eyes, she leaned just slightly toward me and whispered, "Let's file this under secrets." The words were playful, even teasing, but the weight of them hung in the air between us. It wasn't just a joke about books anymore. It was a confession wrapped in laughter, an acknowledgement of the unspoken pull that had been growing every day. I looked at her, searching her face, and for the first time I thought I saw her drop her guard completely, just for a heartbeat. The confident librarian, the composed woman who always seemed so untouchable, was letting me see her as someone willing to bend the rules for a secret moment like this. I smiled, though my voice came out softer than I intended. I'll keep it safe. Her lips curved into the faintest smile, and she stepped back with an ease that made it seem as though nothing unusual had happened. But I could still feel the warmth of where her arm had brushed mine, the teasing lilt of her words echoing in my head. The shelves around us were full of stories, countless lives bound in paper and ink. Yet in that quiet corner, with her so close I could hear the gentleness of her breath, I realized something. The story I wanted most wasn't written in any of those books. It was unfolding right here, between us, under secrets no one else needed to know. The night of the storm was the closest we ever came to crossing the invisible line between us. The rain had been falling for hours, heavy and insistent, rattling against the tall windows of the library. By the time evening settled in, thunder rolled low across the sky, and the building emptied out faster than usual. One by one, the patrons slipped away until it was only the two of us again, her moving quietly among the shelves and me pretending to read in my usual corner while stealing glances in her direction. Then, with a sudden crack, the lights flickered. A heartbeat later, the entire library sank into darkness. I froze, the silence so complete I could hear my own breath. Then came the sound of her voice, calm but softened by the dark. "Hold on. There should be lanterns in the back." Her footsteps guided me, and soon a golden glow flickered to life. The storm had taken the power, but the lantern turned the library into something entirely different, intimate, almost otherworldly. Shadows danced along the shelves, and the rain became a steady backdrop to the hush between us. She set the lantern on a table and sat down, her shoulders easing as though surrendering to the moment. I joined her, and for the first time, we were seated together, close enough that I could see the small flecks of gold in her eyes. We talked, not about books, not about the library, but about ourselves. She told me about her past, the sacrifices, the quiet loneliness that sometimes came with being the strong one everyone relied on. Her voice trembled once when she admitted how often she wondered if anyone truly saw her. I told her things I hadn't said to anyone, about my restlessness, my search for belonging, the way I always felt I was looking for something undefined. The more we spoke, the closer we leaned. Not intentionally, but naturally, like two threads drawing together without realizing they're being woven into the same fabric. Our hands met on the table, tentative at first, the brush of her knuckles against mine, the warmth of her skin grounding me in the moment. I let my thumb trace lightly over her hand, and though she trembled just slightly, she didn't pull away. Instead, her fingers shifted, curling around mine, holding on as if the storm outside belonged only to us. We were so close then. The lantern light painted her face in soft gold, and I could feel her breath, warm and unsteady, mingling with mine. My chest ached with the simple urge to close the small distance between us. But just as I leaned closer, she hesitated. Her eyes closed, then opened, searching mine with a mix of longing and fear. "If we do this," she whispered, "everything changes." The words held me still. I wanted to tell her I didn't care, that nothing mattered but this moment. Yet I also felt the weight of what she meant. The world outside, the judgments, the risks, they weren't things either of us could ignore. So we stopped, not because the desire wasn't there, but because it was too strong, too undeniable. We sat in silence, hands still entwined, the storm raging outside while inside, we hovered on the edge of something we both wanted but weren't yet ready to claim. And somehow, that fragile, unfinished closeness felt just as powerful as any kiss could have been. The storm passed, but the memory of that night didn't. The weight of her hand in mine, the closeness of her breath, the almost of it all, it lingered with me long after the rain cleared. The next evening, I went back to the library, half afraid that things might feel different. Half afraid that she would return to her usual composure, pretending nothing had ever happened in the glow of that lantern. When I walked through the doors, she was there, behind the counter, her posture steady as always. For a moment, I wondered if I had only imagined the softness in her voice, the way her fingers had trembled against mine. But then her eyes lifted and found me. And in that simple glance, I knew she remembered it too. I settled into my corner as usual, though I didn't even bother to open a book. The air between us felt charged again, like something quietly humming beneath the ordinary silence. After a while, she walked over, moving slowly, deliberately, as if giving herself time to decide what she wanted to do. She stopped beside me, her hand resting lightly on the back of my chair. The same subtle touch she had given me before, but now it carried a different weight. A familiarity. "You came back," she said softly. I looked up at her, unable to hide my smile. "I think you knew I would." For the first time, she laughed quietly, not the polite kind I'd heard before, but a laugh that held warmth, almost relief. She glanced around the empty library, then lowered her voice, leaning in closer. "The archive room will be unlocked tomorrow," she murmured, her tone playful yet deliberate. "But let's file that under secrets." The word struck me differently this time. Not just teasing, but an invitation. A promise that there was a place for us, somewhere beyond the gaze of others, where the fragile bond between us could grow without interruption. I wanted to say something back, something clever or meaningful, but before I could, she touched my wrist gently. It was such a small gesture, but it silenced me completely. Her thumb brushed lightly across my skin, and I felt the warmth of her hand spread through me, steadying my breath. Then she leaned down, close enough that I could see the faint lines at the corners of her eyes, the graceful signs of years that only made her more beautiful. She pressed her lips to my cheek, soft, lingering, almost trembling, as though she wasn't entirely sure she should, but couldn't stop herself. When she pulled back, her eyes shone with something unspoken, something fragile but hopeful. She didn't explain. She didn't have to. "Good night," she whispered, her hand slipping away, though the warmth of her touch stayed long after she moved. I left the library that evening with the echo of her kiss on my skin and the quiet certainty that some stories don't belong on shelves. Some stories are lived in whispers, in glances, in the simple, secret promises between two people who never expected to find each other. And ours, whatever it was becoming, had only just begun.